There are betrayals that destroy fortunes, and then there are betrayals that destroy souls. In a dusty 1880s frontier courtroom, cattle baron Eli McGraw thought leaving his wife Clara for a younger woman would be simple. Just another business decision. He was wrong. After 30 years of building an empire together, Clara finally broke her silence. The small wooden courthouse became the stage where decades of sacrifice, hurt and wounded pride would be laid bare. Judge Harland didn't just divide property that day, he divided a legacy. What happened in that courtroom would force Eli and his new love to face a reckoning neither expected. But what does justice look like when a man gambles everything on a lie? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The McGraw Ranch stretched across 15,000 acres of Montana territory, where the grass grew tall enough to hide a calf, and the wind carried the scent of sage and cattle across endless horizons. Eli McGraw had spent the better part of 30 years turning this land into something that mattered, something that would outlast him. At 58, his hands were scarred from rope burns and barbed wire, his face weathered by sun and wind until it resembled the cracked earth after a drought. He was not a handsome man by conventional standards, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned every acre he owned, or so he believed. Clara McGraw stood at the kitchen window of their ranch house, watching the morning light spread across the valley like honey poured from a jar. She was 54, though the years had not been particularly kind. Her hands, once soft and delicate, were now work-worn and capable. Her dark hair, which Eli had once loved to see unpinned at night, was now streaked with silver and pulled back in a practical bun. The lines around her eyes spoke of decades spent squinting into the sun, checking fence lines, counting cattle, managing books by lamplight long after Eli had gone to bed. She still wore her wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, worn thin over the decades, rubbed smooth by years of washing dishes, kneading bread, gripping reins, and turning the pages of ledger books. The ring had lost its shine, but Clara had never thought to replace it. It was part of her, like the calluses on her palms or the ache in her lower back that came with age. The ranch house itself told the story of their life together. Built in 1852, the year after they married, it had started as a modest two-room cabin. Over the years, they had added rooms as their fortunes improved and their family grew. First came the bedroom for their eldest son, James, then another room when Thomas was born 2 years later, a third addition when their daughter Sarah arrived. Each room represented a season of hope, a belief that they were building something permanent. The kitchen was Clara's domain, and she had made it efficient through years of practice. The cast-iron stove she had insisted Eli purchase from a traveling merchant in '64 still heated the room on cold mornings. The shelves she had installed herself held jars of preserves she put up every autumn: peaches, tomatoes, pickles, jams. The kitchen table, scarred by decades of use, had hosted countless family meals, business negotiations with neighboring ranchers, and quiet evenings when she and Eli would sit across from each other with their coffee, planning the next season's work. Those evenings seemed like a lifetime ago now. Eli came to ranching with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work until his hands bled. Clara brought the land. Her father, Samuel Hutchins, had claimed this territory in the late 1840s, one of the first settlers brave enough to push this far into Montana. He had built a modest operation, raised Clara and her 2 brothers here, and watched 2 of his children survive to adulthood. When Clara was 23 and Eli was 27, Samuel gave his blessing to their marriage with one condition: the land would be Clara's inheritance, held in her name, with Eli as partner and steward. It was written clearly in Samuel's will, a document Clara's mother had insisted be drafted by a proper lawyer from back east. The land would belong to Clara. Everything built upon it would belong to them both, together as equal partners in the eyes of God and the law. Samuel died in the winter of 1855, 3 years after the wedding. By then, Clara was pregnant with James, and Eli had already begun expanding the herd. They weathered that first terrible grief together, Eli holding Clara through the long nights when she wept for her father. Clara grateful to have a partner who understood the weight of legacy. The early years were hard in ways that people who had not lived them could never truly comprehend. There were seasons when they barely survived, when drought killed half the herd and they had to choose between buying seed or paying workers. There were winters so brutal that they lost count of the cattle that froze standing up, ice forming in their nostrils until they simply stopped breathing. There were summers when the heat seemed to bake the moisture out of everything, turning the grass brittle and yellow, forcing them to drive the cattle to higher ground in search of water. Through it all, Clara and Eli worked side by side. She learned to ride as well as any ranch hand, could rope a calf and brand it without hesitation, could spot a sick animal from 100 yards away. She managed the breeding program, keeping meticulous records of which bulls to pair with which cows, tracking bloodlines and strengths. She negotiated with buyers from back east, learning to spot a cheat and hold firm on price. She kept the books, tracking every dollar that came in and went out, making sure they stayed ahead of their debts. Eli handled the heavy labor, mending fences, breaking horses, leading the cattle drives to market. But he relied on Clara's judgment in ways he rarely acknowledged aloud. When a decision needed to be made about whether to sell now or wait for better prices, he asked Clara. When they needed to hire new hands, Clara interviewed them and made the final choice. When water rights became an issue and neighboring ranchers tried to cut off their access to Copper Creek, it was Clara who rode to the territorial office and negotiated the agreement that secured their water supply for decades to come. Their children grew up watching this partnership. James, now 32, ran the day-to-day operations of the ranch with his younger brother Thomas, who was 30. Both sons had their father's build and work ethic, but they had inherited their mother's careful planning and attention to detail. Sarah, 28, had married a good man named Robert Kane and moved to his family's homestead 2 days' ride to the east. She visited when she could, usually bringing her 3 young children to spend time at the ranch where she had grown up. The McGraw Ranch had become something remarkable. What started as one man's modest claim had grown into an empire of 15,000 acres, 3,000 head of cattle, 24 horses, and a reputation that reached all the way to Chicago. Buyers knew that McGraw cattle were healthy, well-bred, and worth the premium price. Other ranchers respected Eli's judgment and sought his advice. The family name meant something in this territory, but somewhere along the way, something had shifted between Eli and Clara. Clara could not pinpoint the exact moment when her husband began to drift away. It happened gradually, like water wearing away stone, imperceptible on any given day, but undeniable over time. The conversations became shorter, more focused on business and less on each other. The evenings when they used to sit together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams, became rare and then stopped altogether. Eli began finding reasons to ride into town more often, staying late for meetings that Clara was not invited to attend. She told herself it was natural. They were older now, the passion of youth long behind them. Marriage was about partnership and respect, not romance. She had her work, he had his, and they were building something meaningful together. That should be enough, but in the quiet moments, when she lay awake at night and listened to Eli's breathing beside her, she wondered if she had somehow failed him. Had she become too focused on the ranch and forgotten to be a wife? Had she let herself go, her appearance fading with the years until he no longer saw her as desirable? Had she been too strong, too capable, taking away his sense of being needed? The questions gnawed at her, but she never asked them aloud. Pride, perhaps, or fear of the answers. The whispers started about 6 months ago. Clara first heard them in town, at the general store where she went every few weeks to buy supplies. 2 women fell silent when she approached, their eyes darting away too quickly. A rancher's wife offered sympathy that Clara did not understand. The preacher's wife touched Clara's arm with a gentleness that felt like pity. Clara ignored it all. Frontier towns thrived on gossip. There was always some scandal, some rumor making the rounds. She refused to dignify baseless talk with her attention. But then Eli started coming home with perfume on his collar. Not her perfume, something sweeter, more delicate, expensive. The kind of scent a woman wore when she wanted to be noticed. Clara said nothing. She washed his shirts and pretended not to smell it. Eli started taking baths in town instead of at home. He bought new clothes, paying more attention to his appearance than he had in years. He trimmed his beard more carefully, slicked his hair back with pomade. At 58, he suddenly cared about looking younger. Clara watched these changes with a sinking feeling in her chest, but still she said nothing. Perhaps confronting it would make it real. Perhaps if she ignored it, it would pass, the way a fever sometimes breaks on its own. On a cold evening in late October, Clara found the letter. She had not been snooping. Eli had asked her to bring him his good coat from the bedroom, the one he wore to church and important meetings. She lifted it from the wardrobe and felt something crinkle in the inside pocket. Without thinking, she reached in and pulled out a folded piece of cream-colored paper. The moment she unfolded it, the scent hit her. That same sweet perfume, stronger now, unmistakable. The letter was brief, written in an elegant hand. My dearest Eli, every moment away from you feels like an eternity. When we are together, I feel alive in ways I never imagined possible. You have awakened something in me that I thought died with my late husband. I count the hours until I can see you again. Yours always, Victoria. Clara stood in the bedroom, the letter trembling in her hands. She read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But they remained the same. Victoria. Even the name sounded young and fresh. Clara carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the coat pocket. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, though her mind felt strangely blank. She carried the coat downstairs and handed it to Eli without a word. "Thank you," he said, not looking up from the newspaper he was reading by the fire. Clara nodded and walked back to the kitchen. She stood at the sink, staring out the window into the darkness, and finally allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been denying for months. Her husband was in love with someone else. That night, after Eli had gone to bed, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ranch ledger open in front of her. She had kept these books since the beginning, recording every transaction, every profit and loss, every decision made. 30 years of their life together, documented in her careful handwriting. She thought about her father, about the land he had given her, about the promise she had made to honor his legacy. She thought about the children they had raised, the empire they had built together. She thought about the girl she had been at 23, full of hope and love, believing that marriage meant forever, and she thought about the woman she was now, 54, weathered, tired, but not broken. Not yet. Clara closed the ledger and placed her worn hands flat on the table. In the morning, she would confront Eli. She would demand the truth. And then she would decide what came next, because after 30 years of partnership, she deserved at least that much, the dignity of truth. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of autumn day when the air felt sharp enough to cut. Clara rose before dawn, as she always did, and went through her morning routine with mechanical precision. She stoked the fire in the kitchen stove, put coffee on to boil, and began preparing breakfast. Her hands moved without conscious thought, cracking eggs into the skillet, slicing bread, setting the table for two. Eli came downstairs at his usual time, hair still damp from washing, dressed for a day of work. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, reaching for the newspaper he had brought home from town the previous day. "Eli," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "We need to talk." He looked up, mild surprise crossing his face. In 30 years of marriage, Clara had rarely interrupted his morning routine. "Can it wait? I need to ride out to the south pasture this morning. Jenkins says we've got a fence down." "No," Clara said quietly. "It cannot wait." Something in her tone made him set down the newspaper. He studied her face, and she saw the moment he understood that this conversation had been coming, that perhaps he had been expecting it. "What's this about?" he asked, though they both knew. Clara walked to the coat rack by the door, reached into the pocket of his good coat, and pulled out the perfumed letter. She placed it on the table between them, the cream-colored paper stark against the worn wood. Eli's face went pale, then flushed red. He did not reach for the letter. He did not need to read it again. "How long?" Clara asked. "Clara, how long, Eli?" He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. 8 months, 8 months. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Who is she?" "Her name is Victoria Ashford. She's a widow, moved here from Denver about a year ago." "How did you meet her?" "At the hotel. She was having trouble with her wagon wheel. I helped her." Eli's words came slowly, reluctantly, like a man confessing to a crime. "We started talking. She's different, Clara. She makes me feel alive." Clara finished, her voice bitter. "Yes, I read the letter." Eli flinched. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but it did happen. It's been happening for 8 months while I've been keeping your house, managing your books, running this ranch alongside you." Clara's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure. "While I've been your wife." "You stopped being my wife years ago," Eli said, and the words came out harsh, defensive. "You became a business partner, a ranch foreman. When was the last time you looked at me as anything other than another worker on this land?" The accusation stung because there was truth in it, however unfair. "I became what this life required me to become," Clara said. "We built this ranch together, Eli. Every decision, every sacrifice, we made them together. If I became hard, it's because frontier life is hard. If I focused on work, it's because the work needed doing. I know that." Eli's voice softened slightly. "I'm not saying you failed. I'm saying we both did. We stopped being husband and wife somewhere along the way. We became, I don't know what, colleagues, partners in a business venture. So you found someone who makes you feel the way you did 30 years ago," Clara said. "Someone young and fresh who doesn't have calluses on her hands or lines on her face. Someone who hasn't spent 3 decades working herself old, keeping this empire running." "Victoria is 32, Eli said. "She's not a child. She's a grown woman who knows what she wants. What she wants is your money," Clara said flatly. "Does she know how you earned it? Does she know about the years when we ate nothing but beans and salt pork because we had to buy seed? Does she know about the winter we lost half the herd and you cried in my arms because you thought we'd lose everything? Does she know that every acre of this land, every head of cattle, every bit of comfort you can offer her was built by 2 people, not 1? Eli stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't come here to be interrogated. I came down for breakfast." "Then let me make this simple," Clara said, her voice cold now, all emotion locked away behind a wall of iron will. "What are your intentions?" Eli was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, the words came out quietly, almost gently, which somehow made them worse. "I want a divorce." Clara had known it was coming, but hearing the words still felt like being kicked in the chest. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "I'm going to marry Victoria," Eli continued. "I know it's not what you want to hear, but I've made my decision. I'm not getting any younger, Clara. Neither of us is. I don't want to spend whatever years I have left in a marriage that's dead in everything but name." "Our marriage isn't dead," Clara said. But even as she spoke, she wondered if it was true. "Yes, it is," Eli said, not unkindly. "It's been dying for years. We both know it. The only difference is I'm willing to admit it and do something about it." "Do something about it," Clara repeated. "You mean abandon your wife of 30 years for a woman young enough to be your daughter?" "I mean stop living a lie," Eli said. "I'm sorry, Clara. I truly am. You've been a good wife, a good partner. You deserve more than what we've become. But I can't give you what you need, and you can't give me what I need. It's better this way." "Better," Clara said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Better for whom?" "For both of us, in the long run." Eli walked to the door and took his hat from the hook. "I'll move my things out today. I'll stay at the hotel in town for now. We can work out the details through lawyers. I don't want this to be ugly, Clara. We can be civilized about it. Civilized, Clara repeated. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him understand the magnitude of what he was doing. But she held herself still, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. You're going to walk away. From 30 years of marriage, from the children we raised, from everything we built together, and you want it to be civilized. The children are grown, Eli said. They'll understand. And as for what we built, we'll divide it fairly. You'll be provided for, Clara. I'm not a monster. No, Clara said quietly. You're just a fool. Eli's jaw tightened. I'll send some men for my things this afternoon. He put on his hat and opened the door, pausing on the threshold. For what it's worth, I did love you once. I want you to know that. Once, Clara said. That's the saddest word I've ever heard. Eli left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the smells of breakfast and coffee, the morning light streaming through the windows. She looked down at the perfumed letter still lying on the table, at her wedding ring catching the light, at her work-worn hands that had built an empire alongside the man who was now walking away. She did not cry. Not yet. There would be time for tears later. Instead, she walked to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out a wooden box she kept on the top shelf. Inside was her father's will, the original deed to the land, and the marriage certificate that bound her to Eli McGraw. She spread the documents on the table and read through them carefully, noting every word, every clause, every detail. Her father's will was clear. The land belonged to Clara. Everything built upon it belonged to both of them as equal partners. Equal partners. Clara folded the documents carefully and placed them back in the box. Then she put on her coat, took the ranch ledger from the shelf, and walked out to the barn where her horse waited. She had an appointment to make in town. There was a lawyer there, Samuel Greaves, who had known her father. He would know what to do, because if Eli McGraw thought he could walk away from 30 years of partnership with nothing more than a promise to be fair, he was about to learn a hard lesson. Clara had not spent 3 decades building an empire, just to watch it be divided by a man's whim and a younger woman's perfume. If Eli wanted civilized, she would show him what civilized looked like. She would show him what justice looked like. And before this was over, both Eli and his precious Victoria would understand that some prices cannot be negotiated. The town of Millstone Creek was quiet when Clara arrived, riding slowly down the main street past the general store, the hotel, the saloon, and the small white church where she and Eli had been married 30 years ago. She didn't look at the church. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, focused on the small office at the end of the street where Samuel Greaves maintained his law practice. By the time she tied her horse to the hitching post, word had already begun to spread. She could feel the eyes watching from windows, could hear the whispers starting. In a town this small, news traveled faster than wildfire. Clara McGraw, the cattle baron's wife, had come to see a lawyer. By sundown, everyone would know why. Clara straightened her shoulders, tucked the ranch ledger under her arm, and walked through the lawyer's door with her head held high. The battle had begun. Samuel Greaves was 73 years old, with white hair, intelligent eyes, and hands that trembled slightly when he poured tea. He had practiced law in Montana Territory for 45 years, arriving when it was still wild country and staying as civilization slowly took root. He had known Clara's father, had in fact drafted Samuel Hutchins' will all those years ago. When Clara walked into his office carrying the ranch ledger, Greaves stood slowly, his face registering recognition and concern. "Mrs. McGraw," he said, his voice gentle. "Please sit down." Clara sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk and placed the ledger between them. "I need your help, Mr. Greaves. I assume this is about your husband." Clara was not surprised that he already knew. Gossip spread through frontier towns like water finding cracks in stone. "Eli has asked for a divorce. He's been having an affair with a woman named Victoria Ashford. He wants to marry her." Greaves nodded slowly, his fingers steepled in front of him. I heard rumors, but I didn't put much stock in them. I'm sorry, Clara. This must be very difficult. Difficult doesn't begin to describe it, Clara said. But I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I need to know my legal standing. Eli seems to think we can simply divide everything and go our separate ways. I don't believe it's that simple. You're right to think so, Greaves said. He gestured to the ledger. May I? Clara pushed it across the desk. Greaves opened it and began turning pages, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the entries. Clara had been keeping these books for 30 years, documenting every decision, every transaction, every contribution made by either partner. Her handwriting filled page after page, dates, amounts, livestock counts, property improvements, negotiations conducted, agreements reached. This is extraordinary, Greaves said after several minutes. You've documented everything. I learned early that memory fades and disputes arise, Clara said. Written records endure. Indeed they do. Greaves continued reading, making occasional notes on a separate piece of paper. Mrs. McGraw, what exactly do you want from this divorce? Clara had spent the entire ride into town asking herself that same question. I want what's fair, she said finally. I want recognition for the work I've done, the sacrifices I've made, the contributions I've given to building that ranch. And I want to make sure that if Eli is going to walk away from our marriage, he doesn't get to walk away with everything we built together. Your father was a wise man, Greaves said. He insisted on certain provisions in his will that most men of that era didn't consider. The land was deeded to you specifically, not to your husband. I know, Clara said. I have the will and the original deed with me. She pulled the documents from inside her coat and handed them to Greaves. He examined them carefully, cross-referencing them with the ledger entries. This strengthens your position considerably, he said. The land itself is yours, everything. Built upon it, the ranch house, the barns, the fences, the water rights, all of that was constructed during your marriage using joint labor and resources. Does that mean it belongs to both of us? In the eyes of the law, yes. Montana Territory follows the principle of equitable distribution in divorce cases. The court will look at each spouse's contribution to the marital assets and divide them accordingly. Greaves looked at her over his spectacles. Based on these records, you have a strong case for at least half of everything. Possibly more. More? The land was yours to begin with. Your father's will is explicit on that point. Eli came into the marriage with essentially nothing. Ambition and strong hands, yes, but no property, no capital. You provided the foundation upon which the ranch was built. These ledgers show that you've been an equal partner in every business decision for 3 decades. You managed breeding programs, negotiated sales, handled accounts, secured water rights. He tapped the ledger with one finger. A good attorney could argue that you're entitled to the majority of the assets. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. She had come here hoping for fairness, but she hadn't dared hope for more. What about the cattle, the horses, joint property acquired during the marriage? They'll need to be divided or their value compensated. The same goes for any cash assets, equipment, everything else. Greaves leaned back in his chair. Mrs. McGraw, I need to ask you something. Do you want this divorce? Clara was quiet for a long moment. I want my husband back, she said finally. I want the man I married, the partner I built a life with. But that man seems to be gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize. Someone who thinks 30 years of marriage can be discarded because a younger woman makes him feel alive. She met Greaves's eyes. So no, I don't want the divorce, but I'm not going to beg him to stay. If he's determined to leave, then I'll make sure he understands the full cost of that choice. Then you'll need to prepare yourself for a fight, Greaves said. Eli will hire a lawyer. They'll try to minimize your contributions, argue that you were simply a wife performing household duties. They'll paint the ranch as his creation, his vision, his work. Let them try, Clara said. I have 30 years of records that say otherwise. Good. Greaves pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began making notes. I'll need to examine these documents more carefully, but my initial assessment is that you have an excellent case. I'll draw up the divorce petition. We'll file it here in Millstone Creek, since this is where you reside. We'll request a full accounting of all marital assets, including any accounts or property that Eli may have in his name alone. He has a few accounts at the Territorial Bank, Clara said. I don't manage those. He said they were for emergencies. Greaves' expression sharpened. Interesting. We'll need to see those records. If he's been moving assets without your knowledge, that could be considered dissipation of marital property. What does that mean? It means if he's been hiding or transferring money in preparation for leaving you, the court won't look kindly on it. Judges don't appreciate deception. Greaves began writing more rapidly. I'll file for discovery. That will compel him to disclose all financial records. We'll also need witness statements from people who can testify to your role in the ranch's success. Clara thought about the neighbors who had watched her work alongside Eli for decades, the business associates who dealt with her as an equal, the ranch hands who took orders from her as readily as from Eli. I can provide names. Good. We'll need them. Greaves looked up from his notes. Mrs. McGraw, I want you to understand something. This process will not be easy. It will be public. Everyone in this territory will know your business. They'll have opinions. They'll take sides. Some will sympathize with you. Others will defend Eli. Your private life will be discussed in open court. Are you prepared for that? Clara thought about the whispers she had already heard, the pitying looks, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. I've already lost my privacy, she said. The whole town knows about Eli and Victoria. At least in court, I'll have a chance to tell my side of the story. Then we'll proceed. Greaves extended his hand across the desk. I'll represent you, Clara. Your father was a good friend to me. I won't let his daughter be treated unjustly. Clara shook his hand, feeling the tremor in his fingers, but also the strength of his grip. Thank you, Samuel. Don't thank me yet, he said. Wait until we win. Clara left the lawyer's office as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. She untied her horse and was preparing to mount when she heard her name called. Clara! She turned to see her eldest son, James, riding toward her on his bay gelding. His face was tight with concern. Pa told us, James said as he reined in beside her. Told us he's leaving. Told us about the other woman. His voice broke slightly on the last words. Ma, I'm so sorry. Clara felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. Your father has made his choice, James. I can't change that. It's wrong, James said fiercely. After everything you've done, everything you've been to him, to us, it's wrong, Ma. Yes, Clara said simply. It is. But wrong doesn't mean it isn't happening. James dismounted and stood beside her, tall and strong, so much like his father had been at that age. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight, Clara said. I'm going to make sure that if your father wants to leave, he understands what he's walking away from. And I'm going to make sure that I and you children don't lose everything we've worked for. Tom and I are with you, James said. Whatever you need, Ma, we're with you. Clara reached up and touched her son's face, seeing the boy he had been and the man he had become. I know, sweetheart, I know. But this is between your father and me. You and your brother need to stay out of it. We can't just stand by and— Yes, you can, Clara said firmly. And you will. Because no matter what happens between Eli and me, he's still your father. I won't have you choosing sides in this. Do you understand me? James looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded reluctantly. Yes, ma'am. Good. Clara mounted her horse, settling into the saddle with the ease of long practice. Tell your brother what's happening. Tell him I love him. And tell them both, that this ranch will still be here when this is all over. Whatever else happens, I'll make sure of that. She rode out of town without looking back, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road ahead. Behind her, the town of Millstone Creek buzzed with the day's scandal. Ahead of her, the ranch spread across the valley, the land her father had given her, the empire she had helped build. It was still hers, and she would fight to keep it, Eli moved his belongings out of the ranch house over the next 3 days. He came when Clara was out checking fence lines, taking only his personal items: clothes, a few books, his rifle, and a silver pocket watch that Clara had given him on their 25th wedding anniversary. The watch was engraved on the back, "To my eternal partner, C.M." Clara found it missing from his dresser drawer and felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted him to keep it, wanted that reminder of what they had been to each other. Another part of her felt it was a lie now, that inscription, eternal partner. Nothing was eternal, it seemed. Not love, not promises, not 30 years of shared history. He left behind the family photographs, the ones that showed them young and hopeful, standing in front of their first small cabin with their arms around each other. He left the quilt Clara's mother had sewn for their wedding, the one they had slept under for decades. He left everything that spoke of their life together, taking only what allowed him to pretend he was starting fresh. Victoria Ashford lived on the eastern edge of Millstone Creek, in a small but well-appointed house that had belonged to her late husband. George Ashford had been a banker who died of pneumonia 2 winters ago, leaving Victoria a widow at 30. She had come west from Denver seeking a fresh start, drawn by letters from a cousin who lived in the territory. She was beautiful in a way that Clara knew she herself had never been. Delicate features, smooth skin, golden hair that she wore in fashionable curls. She dressed in the latest styles from back east, her waist cinched tight, her skirts rustling with petticoats. The women in town were divided in their opinions of Victoria. Some pitied her as a widow trying to survive in hard country. Others saw her as a calculating opportunist who had set her sights on the wealthiest rancher in the territory. A few admired her audacity. Landing Eli McGraw was no small feat, but everyone agreed on one thing. Victoria Ashford had no idea what ranch life truly required. She had come to Montana expecting a genteel existence, the kind of comfortable life her banker husband had provided. She imagined herself as the wife of a prosperous rancher, hosting dinners and social gatherings, wearing fine clothes, managing servants. She had seen Eli's success and wealth without understanding the brutal work that built them. Eli, for his part, was enamored in ways he hadn't felt in decades. Victoria made him feel young again, virile, important. She looked at him with admiration instead of the practical assessment he had grown used to from Clara. She laughed at his jokes, complimented his appearance, made him feel like he was still the ambitious young man who had come to Montana with nothing but dreams. He moved into her house and immediately began spending money to make her comfortable. New furniture arrived from the east. He bought her a piano, though she barely played. He hired a woman from town to cook and clean, knowing Victoria was not accustomed to doing such work herself. He showered her with gifts, jewelry, perfume, fabric for new dresses. Victoria accepted it all graciously, but as the days passed, small concerns began to creep into her thoughts. She heard the gossip in town, heard about Clara hiring a lawyer, heard whispers about court proceedings and property divisions. She began to wonder exactly how much of Eli's wealth would remain his when the divorce was finalized. One evening, as Eli sat in her parlor drinking whiskey and talking about the ranch, Victoria finally voiced her concerns. "Eli, darling," she said, her voice sweet but edged with worry, "what exactly will happen to the ranch when the divorce is settled?" Eli waved a hand dismissively. "Clara will get her share, of course. I'll be fair about it. But the ranch is mine. I built it from nothing. Any judge will see that. But I heard that the land was Clara's to begin with, that her father gave it to her." Eli's expression darkened. "That was a lifetime ago. I'm the one who turned it into something. Clara helped, sure, but she wouldn't have had anything without my work." Victoria studied him, noting the defensiveness in his tone. "What does your lawyer say?" "I hired George Price from Helena. Sharp young fellow. He says we have a good case. Clara was a wife, nothing more. The work of building the ranch was mine." Victoria wanted to believe him, but she had seen the way people in town looked at Clara, with respect, with sympathy, with the kind of regard given to someone who had earned their place through hard work. She had also seen the way some people looked at her, with judgment, with suspicion, with the kind of disdain reserved for women who disrupted other women's marriages. "I just want to make sure we're protected," Victoria said carefully. "I've already lost one husband, Eli. I need to know that you'll be able to provide for me." Something flickered across Eli's face. Hurt, perhaps, or disappointment that her affection might have practical limits. "Is that what this is about? Money?" "No," Victoria said quickly. "Of course not. I care for you deeply, Eli, but I'm also a practical woman. I've learned that love doesn't pay bills or keep roofs from leaking. I need to know that when we marry, we'll have a secure future." Eli reached for her hand. "We will, I promise you, Victoria. I've been setting things aside, making preparations. Clara won't get everything. I'll make sure of that." Victoria felt a small chill at his words. "What do you mean, setting things aside?" "Just being smart," Eli said. "Moving some assets to places Clara doesn't know about. Opening accounts in my name only. Selling a few cattle here and there and putting the money somewhere safe. It's my money, my work. I have a right to protect what's mine." Victoria pulled her hand away slowly. "Eli, that sounds like, isn't that illegal? Hiding money during a divorce?" "It's not hiding," Eli said irritably. "It's protecting. There's a difference," but Victoria wasn't sure there was. She thought about George Ashford, her late husband, and how scrupulously honest he had been in all his business dealings. He had often said that a man's reputation was his most valuable asset, more valuable than money or property. Once lost, it could never be fully recovered. She looked at Eli McGraw, weathered, powerful, so certain of his right to remake his life on his own terms, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Clara's daughter Sarah arrived with her 3 children in tow. She had ridden 2 days to be with her mother, leaving her husband Robert to manage their homestead. Sarah was 28, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. Of all the children, she looked most like Clara. "Mama," she said as she dismounted and embraced her mother. "I came as soon as James sent word." Clara held her daughter tightly, feeling the tears she had been holding back for days, finally threatening to break free. "You didn't need to come all this way." "Yes, I did," Sarah said firmly. She pulled back and looked at Clara's face, seeing the exhaustion and pain her mother was trying to hide. "How are you, really?" Clara glanced at her grandchildren, Emma, age 6, and the twins, Samuel and Grace, age 4, who were already running toward the barn to see the horses. "Honestly, I don't know. Some moments I feel strong, ready to fight. Other moments I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." Sarah linked her arm through her mother's and walked her toward the house. "Tell me everything." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Clara had confronted Eli just days ago, and Clara told her daughter the whole story. She told her about finding the letter, about the confrontation, about Eli's coldness and certainty that he was doing the right thing. She told her about hiring Samuel Greaves and filing for divorce. "I always thought you and Papa were solid," Sarah said quietly. "I looked at your marriage and thought, that's what I want. That partnership, that commitment. I modeled my own marriage after what I saw in you two." "I thought we were solid too," Clara said. "I thought we had something that would last. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became just 2 people living in the same house, working the same land. That's not your fault, Mama, isn't it?" Clara's voice was heavy with doubt. "Maybe I was too focused on the ranch. Maybe I forgot how to be a wife. Maybe if I had paid more attention, been softer, more—" "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "Papa is a grown man who made a choice. A selfish, hurtful choice. You don't get to take responsibility for his decisions." Clara smiled sadly. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "What can I do to help?" "Just being here helps," Clara said. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Your father and I are going to court. The whole town will know our business. People will take sides. Your brothers are angry with Eli. I've tried to keep them neutral, but I don't know if I can. I don't want you caught in the middle of this." "I'm already in the middle of it," Sarah said. "I'm your daughter. I love you both, but Papa is wrong. And I'm going to stand with you, Mama, whatever you need." Clara felt the tears finally spill over. She had been so strong, so controlled, but her daughter's loyalty broke through her defenses. Sarah moved her chair closer and held her mother while she cried, the way Clara had held her through childhood hurts and disappointments. "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "I'm scared of losing everything. I'm scared of being alone. I'm scared that maybe Eli is right. Maybe I did stop being the woman he married. The woman he married grew up," Sarah said. "She became stronger, wiser, more capable. If Papa can't see that, if he'd rather have someone who makes him feel young instead of someone who actually built a life with him, then he's a fool." Clara wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Samuel Greaves thinks I have a strong case. The land was mine to begin with. The ledgers show I was an equal partner in everything. Then we fight," Sarah said. "And we win. Because you deserve better than this, Mama. You deserve justice." Outside, the sun was setting over the McGraw ranch, casting long shadows across the land Clara's father had given her, the empire she had helped build. Tomorrow, Greaves would file the divorce petition. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, Clara sat with her daughter and her grandchildren, and for a few hours she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be loved without conditions, without betrayal, without the constant weight of wondering if she was enough. Tomorrow she would be strong again. Tomorrow she would fight. But tonight she let herself be just a woman who had been hurt, held by a daughter who refused to let her fall. The courthouse in Millstone Creek was not an impressive building. It was a simple wooden structure with a pitched roof, white paint peeling in places, and windows that rattled in a strong wind. But on the morning of November 15th, 1883, it became the center of the entire territory's attention. By 8 in the morning, an hour before proceedings were scheduled to begin, people had already begun gathering. They came from neighboring ranches, from town, from homesteads miles away. Some came out of genuine concern for Clara or Eli. Others came simply for the spectacle. Divorce proceedings were rare enough in frontier territory, but a divorce involving one of the wealthiest couples in Montana was unprecedented. Inside, Judge Marcus Harland prepared his courtroom with methodical care. At 67, Harland had served as territorial judge for 23 years. He was known for his fairness, his patience, and his refusal to be swayed by wealth or influence. He had sharp blue eyes, a full beard gone completely white, and a reputation for asking questions that got to the heart of matters. He had reviewed the initial filings from both sides and found himself troubled by what he read. This was not a simple divorce. This was a dismantling of 3 decades of partnership, a division of an empire, and potentially a case of fraud if Clara's allegations proved true. Clara arrived at 8:30, accompanied by Samuel Greaves and her daughter Sarah. She wore a simple dark dress, appropriate for court, her hair pulled back in her usual practical bun. She carried herself with dignity, her face composed, despite the sleepless night she had endured. The crowd parted for her, some offering nods of support, others simply staring. Eli arrived 10 minutes later with his lawyer, George Price. Price was 35, ambitious, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit that marked him as a man from the city. He had made a name for himself in Helena, defending wealthy clients in land disputes and business conflicts. Eli had paid him a substantial retainer to represent him in this case. Victoria was not present. Eli had insisted she stay away from the proceedings, not wanting her subjected to what he knew would be uncomfortable testimony. But her absence was noted by everyone in attendance. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Harland entered the courtroom. Everyone stood as he took his place at the bench, his gavel resting before him like a declaration of authority. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying easily through the crowded room. "We are here today in the matter of McGraw versus McGraw, a petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Clara McGraw. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. This courtroom will be conducted with decorum and respect. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Is that understood?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Good. Harland looked at both tables. Mr. Greaves, you represent the petitioner? I do, Your Honor. Mr. Price, you represent the respondent? Yes, Your Honor. Then let's proceed. Mr. Greaves, your opening statement. Samuel Greaves stood slowly, his age apparent in the careful way he moved. But his voice was strong and clear when he spoke. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about partnership and betrayal. For 30 years, Clara McGraw worked alongside her husband to build one of the most successful ranching operations in Montana Territory. She was not simply a wife performing household duties. She was an equal partner in every sense of the word, managing finances, negotiating contracts, overseeing breeding programs, securing water rights, making business decisions that directly contributed to the ranch's success. Greaves walked to the evidence table and picked up Clara's ranch ledger, holding it up for the judge to see. This ledger documents 3 decades of partnership. It shows, in Mrs. McGraw's own hand, every significant decision made, every transaction conducted, every contribution from both parties. It shows a woman who was integral to the success of the McGraw Ranch, not incidental to it. He set the ledger down and picked up another document. This is the deed to the original land, granted to Clara McGraw by her father, Samuel Hutchins, in 1851. The land upon which the entire ranch was built was Clara's property from the beginning. Mr. McGraw came into this marriage with no land, no capital, and no assets. Everything they built together on land that belonged to Mrs. McGraw. Price stood. Objection, Your Honor. The ownership of the land is not in dispute. We acknowledge that Mrs. McGraw inherited property from her father. What we dispute is her claim to the enterprise built upon that land. Overruled, Harland said. Mr. Greaves is establishing context. Continue, Counselor. Thank you, Your Honor. Greaves turned back to the judge. Mrs. McGraw is not seeking revenge. She is seeking justice. She wants fair recognition of her contributions and fair division of the assets they built together. She also seeks accountability for what we believe was a deliberate attempt by Mr. McGraw to defraud her by secretly moving assets without her knowledge in preparation for abandoning the marriage. A buzz of reaction swept through the courtroom. Harland banged his gavel once. Order. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Greaves, the judge said. I hope you can substantiate it. We can. Your Honor, the evidence will show that beginning approximately 8 months ago, Mr. McGraw began systematically transferring funds from joint accounts to accounts in his name only. He sold cattle without Mrs. McGraw's knowledge and deposited the proceeds in these hidden accounts. He did this while conducting an affair with another woman and planning to leave his wife. This was not impulsive. It was calculated. Greaves sat down. Price immediately stood for his opening statement. Your Honor, my client does not deny that he wants a divorce. Marriages sometimes fail. That's a sad reality of human nature. But failure of a marriage does not entitle one party to claim the fruits of the other's labor. Price walked to the front of the courtroom, his movements smooth and practiced. Yes, Mrs. McGraw inherited land from her father. But inheriting raw land is very different from building a thriving ranch. That required vision, leadership, and backbreaking physical labor, qualities that Mr. McGraw brought to the marriage in abundance. He was the one who expanded the herd, who negotiated with buyers, who led cattle drives through dangerous territory, who made the decisions that transformed a modest homestead into an empire. Your Honor, Greaves said, rising. Counsel is testifying rather than making an opening statement. Sustained, Harland said. Mr. Price, stick to what you intend to prove, not conclusions. My apologies, Your Honor. Price adjusted his approach. The evidence will show that while Mrs. McGraw was a dutiful wife and helpmate, the business success of McGraw Ranch was primarily due to Mr. McGraw's efforts, vision, and leadership. We will also show that the financial transactions Mr. Greaves characterizes as fraud were merely prudent management of assets by the person who earned them. Price sat down, looking satisfied. Very well, Judge Harland said. Mr. Greaves, call your first witness. Your Honor, I called Thomas Jenkins to the stand. An older man in worn ranch clothes stood and made his way to the witness chair. He was sworn in, his weathered hand on the Bible, his voice steady as he promised to tell the truth. Mr. Jenkins, Greaves began, how long have you known the McGraws? 27 years, Jenkins said. I've worked on the McGraw ranch since 1856. In that time, what role did you observe Mrs. McGraw playing in the ranch's operations? She did everything, Jenkins said simply. She worked alongside Eli from the start. She could rope and brand with the best of us. She managed the breeding program, knew every cow's bloodline, every bull's strengths and weaknesses. She's the one who figured out we needed to rotate pastures to keep the grass healthy. She's the one who negotiated with the railroad when they wanted to run tracks through our grazing land. Got us a better deal than Eli would have. Objection, Price said. Speculation about what Mr. McGraw would have done. Sustained. Stick to what you observed, Mr. Jenkins. Yes, sir. What I observed was two people working together, equal-like. Decisions got made together. Work got done together. If Eli was the muscle of that operation, Clara was the brains. Can you give specific examples? Sure, there was a drought in '68, bad one. Half the ranchers in the territory lost most of their herds. But Clara convinced Eli to drive our cattle up to the high country earlier than usual, even though it meant more work. She'd been tracking the weather patterns, reading almanacs, talking to old-timers. She was right. We lost maybe 10% of our herd that year, while others lost 50–60%. That decision saved the ranch. Jenkins continued with more examples. Clara's role in establishing water rights, her careful financial management during lean years, her ability to spot trouble in the herd before it spread. His testimony painted a picture of a woman who was far more than a housewife. Price's cross-examination tried to diminish these contributions, suggesting that Jenkins was simply being chivalrous to a woman in distress. But the old rancher held firm. I ain't being chivalrous, Jenkins said. I'm being truthful. I worked that ranch for near 3 decades. I know what I saw. Over the next hour, Greaves called 3 more witnesses, neighboring ranchers who had dealt with both Clara and Eli in business matters. Each testified to Clara's active role, her business acumen, her equal partnership in running the ranch. Each described deals negotiated, problems solved, decisions made jointly. When the lunch recess was called, the courtroom was buzzing with conversation. The testimony had been more powerful than many expected. Clara's role was being established not through her own words, but through the observations of people who had no reason to lie. Eli sat at his table, his face tight with frustration. Price leaned close and spoke in low, urgent tones. Whatever strategy they had planned was clearly not working as well as they had hoped. Clara, for her part, sat calmly beside Greaves, accepting congratulations from supporters who approached during the break. But inside, she felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She was winning in court, proving her worth and contribution. But she was doing so at the cost of publicly dismantling a marriage that had once meant everything to her. Judge Harland watched from his chambers, reviewing his notes from the morning's testimony. This case was more complex than he had initially thought. It wasn't just about dividing property. It was about recognizing value, the value of work that had traditionally been dismissed or minimized, simply because it was performed by a woman. He had a feeling this case would set precedent far beyond the McGraw ranch, and he was determined to get it right. The afternoon session began with a shift in strategy from George Price. Rather than continuing to fight against Clara's contributions, he decided to humanize Eli's position. His first witness was someone no one expected to see. Your Honor, Price said, the defense calls Victoria Ashford. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Clara's head turned sharply toward the doors as Victoria entered. Dressed modestly in a grey dress, her usual elaborate hair styled more simply. She looked nervous as she took the witness stand. Miss Ashford, Price began, how long have you known Eli McGraw? About 10 months, Victoria said softly. And how did you meet? My wagon had a broken wheel outside the hotel. Mr. McGraw stopped to help me. He was very kind. Did your relationship develop from there? Yes, we began talking, having dinner occasionally. He seemed lonely. He talked about feeling unappreciated, feeling like he had become just a worker on his own ranch rather than a husband in his own home. Greaves stood. Objection. Hearsay as to Mr. McGraw's feelings, and frankly irrelevant to the question of asset division. Your Honor, Price said, I'm establishing context for Mr. McGraw's state of mind when he made the decision to end his marriage. I'll allow it, but let's not wander too far afield. Mr. Price, Harland said, thank you, Your Honor. Miss Ashford, did Mr. McGraw express to you why his marriage had failed? Victoria glanced at Clara, then quickly away. He said that he and Mrs. McGraw had grown apart, that they had stopped being husband and wife years ago, that they were business partners at best, strangers at worst. He said he felt invisible in his own home. Clara's hands tightened in her lap, but her face remained impassive. And yet he stayed married for 30 years. Why do you think that is? Objection, Greaves said. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Price nodded, unbothered. Let me rephrase. Did Mr. McGraw explain to you why he had remained in a marriage that made him unhappy? He said it was duty, responsibility. He felt he owed it to his children, to the ranch, to the community. But when his youngest child was grown and married, he realized he had given enough, that he deserved some happiness in whatever years he had left. No further questions, Price said. Sitting down, Greaves stood for cross-examination, his expression thoughtful. Miss Ashford, you said Mr. McGraw seemed lonely when you met him. Yes. Did he mention that he was married? Victoria hesitated. Not at first. When did he mention it? After we had dinner a few times? She paused. After we had become close, after you had become romantically involved, you mean? Yes. So Mr. McGraw pursued a romantic relationship with you while still married to Mrs. McGraw, and only told you about his wife after the relationship was already established. Price stood. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm simply establishing a timeline, Your Honor, Greaves said mildly. Overruled. The witness will answer. Yes, Victoria said quietly. That's correct. Miss Ashford, when Mr. McGraw told you he was unhappy in his marriage, did he also tell you he was wealthy? I knew he owned a ranch. But did you know how large and successful that ranch was? I learned that over time. And once you learned how wealthy he was, did that affect your feelings toward him? Objection. Price was on his feet. Counsel is implying I'm asking a direct question about motivation, Greaves said. It's relevant to the question of asset distribution and Mr. McGraw's decision-making. I'll allow it, Harland said. Miss Ashford, please answer the question honestly. Victoria's cheeks flushed. I won't pretend that security doesn't matter to me, Mr. Greaves. I'm a widow with no family nearby. I need to be practical. But I care for Eli, Mr. McGraw, regardless of his financial situation. Really? Greaves walked to the evidence table and picked a piece of paper. Your Honor, this is a receipt from a jeweler in Helena, dated 3 weeks ago. Mr. McGraw purchased a diamond necklace for $500, more than most ranch hands make in a year. Miss Ashford, did you receive this necklace? Victoria's voice was barely audible. Yes, and this receipt from a dressmaker for 3 new gowns totaling $250. Yes, and this bill for new furniture delivered to your home, totaling $700. Mr. McGraw wanted me to be comfortable. I'm sure he did. Tell me, Miss Ashford, where do you think Mr. McGraw got the money for these generous gifts? I assume from his ranch income. You assume. Did you ever ask him? No, it wasn't my place to question where the money came from, even though you knew he was married. Even though you knew his wife was presumably unaware of these expenditures? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think about it that way. No, I don't suppose you did. Greaves' voice was not unkind, but it was firm. Miss Ashford, do you know what it takes to run a successful ranch? No, not really. Have you ever worked cattle, mended fences, managed breeding programs, negotiated water rights? No? Have you ever spent a winter in Montana Territory, cut off by snow, with nothing but what you've stored away to survive on? No, I only moved here last year. So when Mr. McGraw told you about his lonely, unhappy marriage, you had no real understanding of what ranch life entails? No appreciation for the kind of partnership required to survive and thrive in this territory? I suppose not, Victoria admitted, and yet you accepted his version of events without question. You accepted expensive gifts bought with money earned by two people's labor. You planned to marry him and enjoy the fruits of a ranch built over 30 years by a husband and wife working together. Is that accurate? Victoria was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be loved. I believe you, Miss Ashford, Greaves said gently. But wanting to be happy doesn't excuse participating in the destruction of someone else's life's work. No further questions, Your Honor. Victoria left the stand, sobbing, and Eli's face was dark with anger. Price whispered urgently to him, clearly trying to calm him down. Mr. Price, Judge Harland said, your next witness? Price stood, collecting himself. Your Honor, the defense calls Eli McGraw to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as Eli made his way to the witness chair. He was sworn in, his hand steady on the Bible, his voice firm as he swore to tell the truth. Mr. McGraw, Price began, tell us about the early days of your marriage. Eli's testimony was carefully crafted to emphasize his physical labor and leadership while minimizing Clara's contributions. He described the back-breaking work of building the ranch, the risks he took, the decisions he made. He portrayed himself as the primary force behind their success, with Clara as a supportive but secondary partner. And what happened to your marriage over the years? Price asked. We grew apart, Eli said. Clara became obsessed with the ranch. Everything was about profit margins and breeding lines and market prices. She forgot how to be a wife. She forgot how to be soft. In the gallery, Sarah McGraw made a sound of disgust that earned her a warning look from the judge. Did you try to talk to her about this? Many times. She always said the ranch had to come first, that we were building something for our children, but somewhere along the way, the ranch became more important than our marriage. And is that why you sought companionship elsewhere? I'm not proud of it, Eli said, and for the first time his voice wavered. I know it was wrong, but I felt invisible in my own home. Victoria made me feel seen again. She made me feel like a man instead of just a ranch foreman. Mr. McGraw, some have accused you of moving assets without your wife's knowledge. Can you explain that? I made some financial decisions without consulting Clara, yes, but they were my decisions to make. I earned that money through my own labor. I had a right to manage it as I saw fit. No further questions. Greaves stood for cross-examination, and there was a glint in his eye that made Eli shift uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. McGraw, you testified that Clara forgot how to be soft. What did you mean by that? She became hard, all business, no warmth, and yet you were building a ranch together in one of the harshest territories in America. Was softness a luxury you could afford? That's not what I meant. Let me ask you this. Did Clara cook your meals? Yes. Wash your clothes? Yes. Tend to you when you were injured or ill? Yes, but bear and raise your 3 children? Of course. Manage the household accounts so you always knew where you stood financially? Yes. Work alongside you in the fields and with the cattle? Yes, but that was her choice, or her necessity. Mr. McGraw, you came into this marriage with nothing. Correct? I had my skills and my willingness to work, but no land, no money, no assets of any kind. That's right. And Clara brought 1,500 acres of prime grazing land given to her by her father. Correct? Yes. So without Clara's land, you would have been working as a hired hand on someone else's ranch, earning wages but never building equity. Is that fair to say? Eli's jaw tightened. I would have found another way, perhaps. But you didn't need to find another way, did you? Because Clara brought you the foundation upon which everything else was built. And in return, you worked that land together. Fair enough? Yes. And during those 30 years, did Clara ever refuse to work? Ever shirk her responsibilities? No. Did she ever complain about the hardships? Not often. Did she ever threaten to leave you during the hard times when you could barely make ends meet? No. But now, when the ranch is successful and profitable, when the hard years are behind you, now you've decided she's not what you want anymore. Now you've found a younger woman who makes you feel alive. Is that accurate? It's more complicated than that, is it? Mr. McGraw, let me show you something. Greaves picked up the silver pocket watch from the evidence table, the one Clara had given Eli for their anniversary. Do you recognize this? Eli's face went pale. Yes, that's mine. Can you read the inscription for the court? To my eternal partner, CM, eternal partner. That's what your wife thought you were. That's what she believed for 30 years, while she worked alongside you, sacrificed alongside you, built alongside you. And now you're telling this court that her contributions were secondary, that your labor was worth more than hers, that you have the right to take the profits of a 30-year partnership and share them with another woman while Clara is left with scraps. I'm not leaving her with scraps, Eli said. I'm willing to be fair. Your definition of fair seems to mean that you get to keep the majority of assets built on land that wasn't yours to begin with, while using money earned through joint effort to romance another woman. That's your idea of fairness? Objection! Price was on his feet. Counsel is arguing rather than questioning. Sustained. Mr. Greaves, do you have actual questions? Just one more, Your Honor. Greaves looked directly at Eli. Mr. McGraw, do you love your wife? The courtroom went completely silent. Eli opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. We've grown apart. That's not what I asked. I asked if you love her. After 30 years, 3 children, building an empire together, surviving droughts and winters and hardships most people can't imagine. Do you love the woman who stood beside you through all of that? Eli's eyes found Clara across the courtroom. For a moment, something flickered in his face, regret perhaps, or memory of what they had been to each other once. I love the woman she was, he said quietly. I don't know the woman she became. No further questions, Greaves said, his voice heavy with disappointment, as Eli stepped down from the witness stand. Judge Harland called for a recess until the following morning. The courtroom emptied slowly, people discussing what they had heard, taking sides, arguing about justice and marriage, and the price of betrayal. Clara remained seated until the room was nearly empty. Sarah touched her shoulder gently. Mama, we should go. In a moment, Clara said. She was looking at the silver pocket watch still lying on the evidence table, catching the afternoon light. Eternal partner. She had meant those words when she had them engraved. She had believed them to her core, and perhaps that was the saddest part of all, that she had kept her promise while Eli had broken his. But promises broken could not be unmade. They could only be accounted for, and tomorrow the accounting would continue. The third day of trial began with an unexpected development. Samuel Greaves stood before Judge Harland with barely contained urgency in his manner. Your Honor, the petitioner wishes to call a surprise witness. We received information late yesterday that is crucial to this case. I apologize for the short notice, but the significance of this testimony cannot be overstated. Price was on his feet immediately. Objection. We haven't been given time to prepare. This is highly irregular. Your Honor, Greaves said, this witness came forward voluntarily after hearing the previous day's testimony. The information he has is directly relevant to our allegations of asset concealment. Judge Harland considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but Mr. Price, you'll have full opportunity for cross-examination, and I'll grant you a recess to prepare if you need it. Who is this witness, Mr. Greaves? Your Honor, I call Ernest Whitmore to the stand. A slight man in his 30s, wearing a neat suit and wire-rimmed spectacles, walked nervously to the witness stand. He was sworn in, his hand trembling slightly on the Bible. Mr. Whitmore, Greaves began. Please state your occupation. I'm a bank clerk at Montana Territorial Bank in Millstone Creek. I've worked there for 12 years, and in that capacity, do you handle accounts for various customers, including Mr. and Mrs. McGraw? Yes, sir. I've managed the McGraw accounts since I started there. Can you describe the typical structure of those accounts? The McGraws maintained 3 accounts. One was a joint account for ranch operations, payroll, supplies, that sort of thing. The second was a savings account, also joint, where they kept reserve funds. The third was a smaller account in Mrs. McGraw's name only, which she used for household expenses. And was this arrangement stable over the years you handled their accounts? Yes, sir. Very stable. Until about 8 months ago, a ripple of interest went through the courtroom. Eli's face had gone pale. What changed 8 months ago? Mr. McGraw came to the bank and opened 2 new accounts, both in his name only. Did Mrs. McGraw know about these accounts? I don't believe so. Mr. McGraw was quite specific that statements should not be sent to the ranch house. He arranged to pick them up personally at the bank. Price stood. Objection. The witness is speculating about Mrs. McGraw's knowledge. Sustained. Mr. Whitmore, stick to what you personally observed or were told directly. Yes. Your Honor, what I can say is that Mr. McGraw specifically requested that no mail regarding these accounts be sent to the ranch address. Thank you. Mr. Whitmore, what happened with these new accounts? Over the following months, Mr. McGraw made regular deposits. Large deposits, usually between $500 and $2,000 at a time. Where did this money come from? According to the deposit slips, from cattle sales. But here's the thing. Whitmore paused, glancing nervously at Eli. The sales were documented as coming from the joint ranch operations. But the money was being deposited into Mr. McGraw's personal accounts, not the ranch operating account. So money that should have gone into the joint account was diverted to personal accounts. Yes, sir. How much total? Whitmore pulled out a small notebook. I took the liberty of calculating it. Over 8 months, Mr. McGraw deposited approximately $14,000 into the 2 personal accounts. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. $14,000 was a fortune, more than most families in the territory would see in a lifetime. Judge Harland banged his gavel. Order! Order in this courtroom! Greaves waited for silence before continuing. Mr. Whitmore, how did you become aware that this might be improper? I didn't think it was my place to question customers' transactions. But when I heard about the divorce proceedings and Mrs. McGraw's claims that assets had been hidden, I realized what I had witnessed might be important. I spoke with my supervisor, and he agreed I should come forward. Thank you. No further questions. Price approached the witness stand, his confident demeanor noticeably strained. Mr. Whitmore, is it illegal for a man to open a bank account in his own name? No, sir. Is it illegal for a man to deposit money he's earned into his own account? No, sir, but please just answer yes or no. Is there any law that says a married man cannot have personal accounts separate from his wife? Not that I'm aware of. So Mr. McGraw broke no banking laws. Correct? Technically correct, but thank you. That's all? Redirect, Your Honor? Greaves asked. Proceed. Mr. Whitmore, you were trying to explain something when Mr. Price cut you off. Please finish your thought. I was going to say that while it's not illegal to have personal accounts, the source of the funds matters. If the money came from joint marital assets, in this case, cattle sales from the ranch, then depositing it into personal accounts without the other spouse's knowledge could be considered conversion of marital property. And in your 12 years at the bank, had you ever seen Mr. McGraw behave this way before? Opening secret accounts diverting ranch income? Never. The McGraws always operated transparently. This was a complete change in pattern, and it coincided with... He hesitated. Coincided with what? With the time when people started seeing Mr. McGraw around town with Miss Ashford. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Your Honor, I'd like to enter the account statements for these 2 accounts into evidence. Any objection, Mr. Price? Price knew he had no grounds to object. No, Your Honor. As Whitmore stepped down, Greaves called his next witness, the supervisor from the Territorial Bank, who confirmed Whitmore's testimony and provided additional documentation showing the pattern of deposits and withdrawals. But Greaves wasn't finished. Your Honor, I have one more witness whose testimony is crucial. I call Herbert Mason, cattle broker from Helena. An older man with a weathered face and trail-worn clothes took the stand. Mr. Mason, what is your occupation? I'm a livestock broker. I arrange sales between ranchers and buyers, mostly from Chicago and the eastern markets. Have you done business with the McGraw Ranch? For about 15 years, yes. Good operation. Fair dealers. Mr. Mason, I'm going to ask you about some specific transactions. Do you recall purchasing cattle from the McGraw Ranch between March and October of this year? Yes, sir. 4 separate purchases, if I recall. Can you describe these transactions? Well, usually when I deal with the McGraws, both Eli and Clara are involved in negotiations. Clara knows her stock better than anyone, can tell you the lineage of every animal, any health concerns, fair market value. But these transactions were different. How so? Eli contacted me directly, said he had some cattle he wanted to move quickly, said Clara was busy with other matters, and he was handling the sales himself. The prices seemed fair, so I didn't question it. How many head of cattle total in these 4 transactions? Mason consulted his own ledger. 240 head, mix of steers and heifers. Total sale price came to just over $12,000. The connection was immediate and obvious. $12,000 in cattle sales, $14,000 deposited in secret accounts. Eli had been selling ranch cattle and pocketing the proceeds. Did you make these payments to Mr. McGraw personally? Yes, sir. Bank drafts made out to Eli McGraw individually at his request, not to the McGraw Ranch account. No, sir. He was specific about that. And was this unusual? Very. Every other transaction over 15 years had been paid to the ranch account, with both signatures required for large amounts. This was the first time I'd dealt with Eli alone, and paid him personally. Did you think it was odd? I did wonder. But it wasn't my place to question a man's business arrangements with his wife. I figured they'd worked it out between them, but they hadn't, had they? Objection, Price said wearily. Speculation. Withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Mason. Price's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. The facts were the facts. Eli had sold substantial ranch assets without Clara's knowledge and kept the money for himself. When Mason stepped down, Judge Harland called for a 15-minute recess. The courtroom erupted in conversation the moment his gavel fell. Clara sat very still, processing what she had just learned. $14,000. 240 head of cattle. Not just an affair, not just a decision to leave, but calculated theft of marital property, planning, premeditation, betrayal that went far deeper than infidelity. Sarah gripped her mother's hand. Mama, this changes everything. Yes, Clara said quietly. Yes, it does. Across the courtroom, Eli sat with his head in his hands, while Price spoke to him in urgent, angry whispers. Victoria, who had returned for this day's proceedings despite the humiliation of the previous day, stared at Eli with dawning horror on her face. When court reconvened, Judge Harland's expression was grim. Mr. Price, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Price stood reluctantly. Your Honor, we request a recess until tomorrow to confer with our client and review this new evidence. Denied. Mr. McGraw opened those accounts. Mr. McGraw deposited that money. Mr. McGraw sold those cattle. The evidence is clear. If he has an explanation, now is the time to offer it. Price turned to Eli, who slowly shook his head. There was no explanation that would make this look like anything other than what it was. Mr. Price? Your Honor, my client. Price paused, clearly struggling. My client admits that he conducted these transactions, but maintains that as the primary earner and operator of the ranch, he had the authority to do so, the authority to secretly sell marital assets and hide the proceeds. Harland's voice was sharp. That's your position? Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We need time to... What's irregular, Mr. Price, is a husband systematically looting marital assets while planning to abandon his wife. What's irregular is conducting secret financial transactions while engaging in an extramarital affair. What's irregular is asking this court to reward such behavior. The judge's anger was evident, and it sent a chill through everyone in the courtroom. Judge Harland was known for his fairness, but he was also known for his moral clarity. And what Eli had done violated every principle Harland held dear. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Harland said. Mr. McGraw, I strongly suggest you spend tonight thinking very carefully about your testimony and your positions in this case. Because I can tell you right now, What I've heard today does not dispose me favorably toward your claims. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Eli said, his voice barely audible. Court is adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, Clara remained seated. Samuel Greaves sat beside her, allowing her time to absorb what had happened. We've won, he said quietly. You know that, don't you? Have we? Clara said. I've discovered that my husband is not just unfaithful, but a thief. That for 8 months he's been stealing from our joint work to fund his affair. That every kind word, every civil conversation during that time was a lie. Have I won, Samuel? Or have I just learned how thoroughly I lost without even knowing it? Greaves had no answer for that. Some victories he had learned in his long years of practice felt more like defeats. Justice could be served while hearts remained broken. Outside the courthouse, Victoria Ashford caught up with Eli as he walked toward his horse. Eli, she said, her voice shaking. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't steal from your wife to buy me gifts. Eli couldn't meet her eyes. Victoria, it's complicated. The money was mine. I earned it. You stole it, Victoria said, her voice rising. You sold cattle that belonged to both of you and hid the money. You used stolen money to romance me, and I was too foolish to question where it came from. I was trying to build a future for us. By destroying your past, by betraying the woman who built that ranch with you. Victoria backed away from him. I can't, Eli, I can't be part of this. What you've done, it's not just wrong. It's cruel. It's criminal. Victoria, please, no. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to be loved, not to be bought with stolen money. I wanted a fresh start, not to be the reason a good woman loses everything. I'm sorry, Eli, I'm so sorry for my part in this, but I can't marry you. I won't. She walked away, leaving Eli standing alone in the street as the sun set over Millstone Creek. Inside the courthouse, Clara finally rose to leave. She had thought she understood betrayal. She had thought the affair was the worst of it. She had been wrong, but now she knew the full scope of what Eli had done. And tomorrow, Judge Harland would decide what justice looked like for a man who had stolen from his own wife to fund his escape from their marriage. Clara walked out into the cooling evening air and breathed deeply. The truth, however painful, was finally fully revealed, and truth, she had learned, was the first step toward justice. Clara did not sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen of the ranch house, the same kitchen where she had confronted Eli weeks ago and tried to make sense of what she had learned. The lamp burned low on the table, casting shadows that danced across the walls, like ghosts of the life she had thought she was living. $14,000. 240 head of cattle. 8 months of systematic deception. She kept returning to that number. 8 months. The same 8 months Eli had been with Victoria, which meant that from the very beginning of his affair, he had been planning his exit strategy. He had not been caught up in passion and made a foolish mistake. He had been methodical, calculated, deliberate. Every time he had kissed Clara goodbye before riding to town, he had been planning. Every time he had sat across from her at this table, discussing ranch business, he had been lying. Every conversation about the future, about next season's calves, about which fields to plant, all of it had been theater, performance, a mask covering his true intentions. Sarah found her mother still sitting there when she came downstairs at dawn. "Mama, you haven't slept?" "No," Clara said simply. "I couldn't." Sarah poured coffee and sat beside her mother. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how completely I was fooled. I prided myself on being observant, on managing accounts, on knowing every detail of our operation. And he was stealing from me for 8 months, and I never noticed." "You trusted him," Sarah said. "That's not a failing, Mama. That's what marriage is supposed to be, is it? Or am I just naive? Should I have been checking his pockets every day, following him to town, demanding to see every account statement?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "You shouldn't have had to live like that. Trust isn't naivety. It's the foundation of any partnership. He's the one who violated that trust, not you for having it." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from the ceramic. "I keep thinking about something Judge Harland said. He asked Eli if there was any explanation that would make this right. And there isn't, is there? There's no way to explain stealing from your wife to fund an affair that makes it acceptable. No, there isn't. So what happens now? The judge awards me the ranch and Eli leaves with nothing? Is that justice? Or is it just revenge disguised as justice? Sarah looked at her mother with concern. Mama, you're entitled to more than just the ranch. You're entitled to compensation for what he stole, for the breach of trust, for... I know what I'm entitled to, Clara interrupted gently. I'm asking what I actually want, because those might be two different things. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning light beginning to creep through the windows. What do you want? Sarah asked finally. Clara thought about it. I want him to understand what he's done, not just to me, but to our children, to the legacy we built, to the promises we made. I want him to see that you can't just discard 30 years because you're afraid of getting old. Her voice broke slightly. I want him to have been better than this. But he wasn't, Sarah said softly. No, Clara agreed. He wasn't. And now I have to decide who I'm going to be in response to that. Later that morning, Clara met with Samuel Greaves in his office before court. I've been reviewing the accounts all night, Greaves said, papers spread across his desk. With the evidence we have now, you're entitled to far more than half the marital assets. The attempted fraud, the secret accounts, the converted cattle sales, all of it works in your favor. I can argue for you to receive 75% or even more. Clara nodded slowly. And what would that leave Eli with? Enough to live on, but not much more. Certainly not enough to maintain his lifestyle or rebuild on the scale he's accustomed to. He'd likely have to work for someone else, possibly leave the territory entirely. And Victoria? If the judge determines she knowingly benefited from the converted assets, she could be ordered to return the value of gifts she received. The jewelry, the furniture, everything. It would likely bankrupt her. Clara walked to the window, looking out at the street where people were already gathering for the final day of trial. Tell me something honestly, Samuel. If we pursue maximum damages, if we take everything we can, is that justice? Or is it vengeance? Greaves considered the question carefully. In my experience, Clara, justice and vengeance often look similar from the outside. The difference is in the intent. Are you seeking to punish, or are you seeking fair compensation for harm done? I don't know, Clara admitted. Part of me wants him to suffer as I've suffered. Part of me just wants this to be over. And part of me, she paused. Part of me still remembers the young man I married before any of this happened. The one who held me when my father died. The one who stayed up all night when Sarah had the fever. The one who built this life with me, even if he eventually tried to tear it down. Those memories are real, Greaves said. But so is what he's done in these recent months. You can honor both truths without letting one erase the other. What do you recommend? I recommend we ask for full restitution of the converted assets, fair division of the remaining property with consideration for your original ownership of the land, and compensation for breach of fiduciary duty. That's not vengeance. That's what you're legally entitled to. Clara turned from the window. And then? And then you move forward. You rebuild. You show your children and grandchildren what it means to stand up for yourself with dignity. You prove that betrayal doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. Clara nodded. All right, let's finish this. The courtroom was even more packed than previous days. Word had spread about the previous day's revelations, and everyone wanted to see how Judge Harland would rule. Clara took her seat beside Greaves, her composure intact despite the sleepless night. Eli arrived looking haggard, his eyes red-rimmed, his clothes slightly rumpled. George Price sat beside him, but there was a distance between them now, a tension that suggested difficult conversations had occurred. Victoria was not present. Clara had heard through Sarah that Victoria had checked out of her house and left for Denver on the morning stage. She had apparently left a letter for Eli, but Clara didn't know its contents. Somehow, she couldn't bring herself to care. Judge Harland entered at exactly 9 o'clock, and the room fell silent. Before we proceed, Harland said, I want to ask if the parties have considered settlement. Given what has been revealed, it might be in everyone's interest to resolve this matter without further litigation. Price stood. Your Honor, my client is willing to discuss settlement terms. Greaves looked at Clara, who shook her head slightly. Your Honor, Mrs. McGraw believes this matter should be decided by the court. Too much has been hidden, too much deception practiced. She wants a clear ruling that will serve as precedent and principle, not just a private agreement. Harland nodded. Very well, Mr. Greaves. Any further witnesses? Just one, Your Honor. I call Clara McGraw to the stand. This was the moment Clara had been both dreading and anticipating. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, was sworn in, and took her seat. Mrs. McGraw, Greaves began gently. You've heard extensive testimony over the past 3 days about your marriage, your contributions to the ranch, and your husband's actions. I want to give you an opportunity to address the court directly. What do you want people to understand about your situation? Clara took a deep breath. I want people to understand that partnership means something. It's not just a word we put on legal documents or say in wedding vows. It's a daily choice to work together, to sacrifice together, to build together. For 30 years, I believed Eli and I were true partners. We made decisions jointly. We weathered hardships jointly. We celebrated successes jointly. Her voice was steady, measured, but the emotion underneath was clear. I'm not standing here because my husband fell in love with someone else. People's hearts change, I understand that, even if it hurts. I'm standing here because he didn't just leave our marriage. He dismantled it deliberately and secretly, while pretending everything was fine. He stole from our joint work to fund his exit. He looked me in the eye every day for 8 months while planning his betrayal. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I've asked myself what I did wrong. Did I work too hard? Did I forget to be soft? Did I fail him somehow? But I've realized that's the wrong question. The right question is, did I keep my promises? And I did, every single one. I was faithful. I was honest. I was a true partner until the very end. She looked directly at Eli for the first time. I can't make you love me, Eli. I can't make you want the life we built together. But I can stand here and say that I deserve better than what you've done. I deserve honesty. I deserve respect. I deserve recognition for the 30 years I gave to our partnership. Not because I'm asking for charity, but because it's what I earned. Mrs. McGraw, Greaves continued, what do you want from this court? I want fair division of the assets we built together. I want the land my father gave me to remain mine. I want the money Eli stole returned to the marital estate. And I want this court to send a clear message that you can't systematically defraud your spouse and walk away unpunished. Not because I want revenge, but because if we don't stand for something, everything becomes negotiable, including honesty, including promises, including 30 years of shared life. Thank you, Mrs. McGraw. Your Honor, I have no further questions. Price stood for cross-examination, but seemed uncertain how to proceed. Mrs. McGraw, he began slowly, you testified that you were a true partner throughout the marriage. Yes. Did you ever consider that perhaps your focus on the ranch, on work, on building the business, did you ever consider that this focus might have pushed your husband away? Clara didn't hesitate. I considered it. Many times, especially in the nights when I lay awake, wondering what I had done wrong. But then I remembered something. We built this ranch together because Eli wanted to build it. He was the one who said we needed to expand. He was the one who pushed for more land, more cattle, more profit. I didn't force him to be ambitious. I supported his ambitions. I worked alongside them. And now I'm being blamed for being too successful at supporting them. Price shifted uncomfortably. I'm simply suggesting that marriages fail for complex reasons. I agree, Clara said. But affairs don't just happen. Theft doesn't just happen. Those are choices, Mr. Price. Eli made those choices. And now he has to live with the consequences. Price had no further questions. The cross-examination had only strengthened Clara's position. Judge Harland called for closing arguments. Greaves stood and delivered a powerful summary of the evidence. The decades of partnership, the original land ownership, the systematic fraud, the breach of trust. He argued passionately for significant damages and a clear message that such behavior would not be tolerated. Price's closing was more subdued. He acknowledged his client's mistakes while still trying to argue for some consideration of Eli's contributions. But his heart clearly wasn't in it. The evidence was too damning. When both attorneys had finished, Judge Harland sat back in his chair. "I'm going to take a brief recess to review my notes and prepare my ruling. We'll reconvene in 1 hour." The courtroom emptied slowly. Clara walked outside into the bright morning sun. Sarah stood beside her, holding her hand. "However this turns out," Sarah said, "I'm proud of you, Mama. You stood up for yourself. You told the truth. That takes courage." Clara squeezed her daughter's hand. "I learned from the best. Your grandfather used to say that the only thing you truly own in this life is your word. Everything else can be taken from you, but if you keep your promises, if you tell the truth, you get to keep your dignity. I intend to walk out of that courtroom today with my dignity intact, whatever else happens." James and Thomas had arrived during the morning session and now stood with their mother and sister. The McGraw family, minus Eli, stood together in the shadow of the courthouse, waiting for judgment. Inside, Judge Harland sat alone in his chambers, looking at the evidence spread before him. He had presided over hundreds of cases in his long career, but few had troubled him as much as this one. Because this wasn't just about property or money. It was about the fundamental question of what we owe to the people we promised to spend our lives with. He picked up his pen and began writing his ruling, knowing that whatever he decided would echo far beyond this one case, this one couple, this one moment in time. In his 23 years on the bench, he had learned that the law was more than rules and precedents. It was also a statement of values, of what a society believed was right and wrong, fair and unfair, just and unjust. And Marcus Harland knew exactly what values he intended to uphold. An hour later, the bailiff called everyone back to the courtroom. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Judge Harland took his seat. Every person in attendance leaned forward slightly, as if the physical distance between themselves and the judge might somehow affect what was about to be said. Clara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. Eli stared at the table in front of him, unable or unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Judge Harland adjusted his spectacles and picked up the papers containing his written ruling. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of dispensing justice. This court has heard 3 days of testimony regarding the marriage of Eli and Clara McGraw. What began as a petition for divorce has revealed something far more troubling, a systematic betrayal of trust that goes to the very heart of what marriage and partnership mean under the law. He paused, looking directly at both parties. "Let me begin with what is clear and undisputed. In 1851, Clara McGraw inherited 1,500 acres of prime grazing land from her father, Samuel Hutchins. This land was deeded to her specifically, with clear provisions in Samuel Hutchins' will that it would remain her property. When Clara married Eli McGraw in 1852, she brought this land into the marriage as her separate property. Eli McGraw brought ambition and a willingness to work, but no property of his own. Clara felt her heart beating faster, but kept her expression neutral. Over the subsequent 30 years, both parties contributed to building what became known as the McGraw Ranch. The evidence presented to this court has been overwhelming on this point. Clara McGraw was not merely a housewife or a helper. She was a full business partner in every sense of the word. She managed accounts, negotiated contracts, oversaw breeding programs, secured water rights, and made strategic decisions that directly contributed to the ranch's success. Harland's voice grew firmer. The testimony of multiple witnesses established that Mrs. McGraw's contributions were equal to, and in some cases exceeded, those of her husband. She worked the land, managed the finances, and built the business alongside Mr. McGraw. To characterize her as anything less than a full partner would be a fundamental distortion of the truth. Eli's face had gone pale. Price sat rigidly beside him, knowing what was coming. Now I turn to the matter of the converted assets. The evidence shows that beginning approximately 8 months ago, Mr. McGraw opened 2 personal bank accounts without his wife's knowledge. Over the following months, he deposited approximately $14,000 into these accounts, money derived from the sale of ranch cattle that were marital property. He did this in secret, deliberately arranging for bank statements to be withheld from his wife. Harland's voice took on an edge of anger. This was not a case of poor communication or different management styles. This was deliberate fraud. Mr. McGraw sold marital assets, converted the proceeds to his personal use, and concealed these actions from his wife while simultaneously engaging in an extramarital affair. The timing is not coincidental. From the very beginning of his relationship with Miss Ashford, Mr. McGraw was planning his exit and securing assets for himself. He paused to let that sink in. I want to be absolutely clear about what this means. A husband owes his wife more than mere fidelity, though that would be enough. He owes her honesty in all financial dealings that affect their joint interests. He owes her transparency. He owes her the basic respect of not stealing from her while planning to abandon her. Mr. McGraw failed on every one of these counts. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. This was vindication, yes, but it was also the formal acknowledgement of just how thoroughly she had been betrayed. The law in Montana Territory recognizes equitable distribution in divorce cases. Assets acquired during marriage are generally divided based on each spouse's contribution. But this case presents special circumstances. First, the land was Mrs. McGraw's separate property from the beginning. Second, Mrs. McGraw's contributions to the business were equal to her husband's. Third, and most importantly, Mr. McGraw engaged in fraud by converting marital assets to his own use. Harland began listing his rulings methodically. First, I find that the original 1,500 acres of land, being Mrs. McGraw's separate property, shall remain entirely hers. Second, I find that all improvements made to that land during the marriage, buildings, fences, water rights, developed pastures, were created through joint effort and joint resources. These improvements have current value, and Mr. McGraw is entitled to compensation for his labor. However, that compensation must be offset against the assets he converted. Third, the $14,000 deposited in Mr. McGraw's secret accounts, plus any property purchased with those funds, shall be returned to the marital estate for division. Fourth, Mr. McGraw shall be required to account for every asset purchased during the affair, gifts, furnishings, jewelry, everything. The value of these items shall be calculated and deducted from his share of the marital estate. Clara's lawyer, Samuel Greaves, was taking notes rapidly, barely able to keep up with the comprehensive ruling. Fifth, the remaining marital property, cattle, horses, equipment, cash reserves, shall be divided with consideration for the fraud committed. Mrs. McGraw shall receive 70% of these remaining assets. Mr. McGraw shall receive 30%. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. This was not an equal split. This was punishment, legally sanctioned and fully justified. Sixth, the ranch operations, including the name McGraw Ranch. I shall remain with Mrs. McGraw, as the ranch is operated on her land, and she has demonstrated equal or superior management capabilities. Eli's shoulders slumped. He was losing everything. The land, the ranch, the business he had spent 30 years building, or thought he had been building. In truth, he had been building it with someone who was now taking her rightful share, plus compensation for his betrayal. Judge Harland wasn't finished. Seventh, all legal fees and court costs associated with these proceedings shall be borne by Mr. McGraw. As his actions necessitated this litigation, he looked up from his papers, fixing Eli with a stern gaze. Mr. McGraw, do you understand the ruling I have just delivered? Eli stood slowly, his voice hoarse when he finally spoke. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that you have not only lost your marriage, but also the majority of your assets due to your own fraudulent actions? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything to say before I finalize this judgment? Eli McGraw stood in the witness box, a man who looked like he had aged a decade in 3 days. The proud cattle baron who had entered this courtroom was gone, replaced by someone broken and diminished. He looked at Judge Harland, then at Clara, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I need to say something." Harland nodded. "Proceed." Eli turned to face Clara directly for the first time since his testimony days ago. "Clara," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anyone in this courtroom to understand what I did or why I did it. But I need you to know that I am sorry. Not for getting caught, not for losing the ranch. I'm sorry for betraying you, for lying to you, for taking what we built together and trying to tear it apart for my own selfish reasons." Clara's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "You asked me yesterday if I loved you," Eli continued. "I gave you a coward's answer. I said I loved the woman you were. The truth is harder than that. I loved you, I still love you, but I was afraid. Afraid of getting old. Afraid of becoming irrelevant. Afraid that the best years were behind me, and all I had left was decline and death. When Victoria looked at me and made me feel young again, I let myself believe that feeling young was the same thing as actually being young. I let myself believe that 30 years of partnership could be exchanged for a few months of passion. I was wrong about all of it." He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. "I told myself I deserved happiness. What I really meant was that I deserved to escape the consequences of aging, to escape the reality that we both had grown older, that our bodies weren't what they were, that the romance of our youth had settled into something steadier, but less exciting. I couldn't accept that. And rather than talk to you about it, rather than work through it like partners should, I ran. Worse than that, I stole from you while running." Judge Harland listened carefully, his face unreadable. "There's no excuse for what I did," Eli said. "Moving that money, selling those cattle without telling you, planning my departure while sitting across from you every night at dinner. It was all calculated betrayal. I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. I told myself I was protecting my future, but I was really just being a thief and a coward." He paused, struggling to find words. "You stood up here yesterday and talked about partnership, about keeping promises. You were right. You kept every promise you made to me. You were faithful when I wasn't. You were honest when I lied. You worked just as hard as I did, harder in some ways, and I repaid you by trying to steal from you. If this court takes everything from me, it's less than I deserve." Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, that was too much to ask, perhaps too much to give, but something. An acknowledgement that the man she had married was still somewhere inside this broken person, standing before her. "Your Honor," Eli said, turning back to the judge, "I understand your ruling and I accept it. I won't appeal. I won't fight it. Mrs. McGraw, Clara, she deserves everything you've awarded her. She earned it through 30 years of hard work and dedication. I tried to take that from her, and I'm grateful that this court stopped me." He looked at Clara one last time. "I hope someday you can remember the good years without the bad ones completely erasing them. I hope our children can forgive me eventually. And I hope you build something beautiful on that land, Clara. You always had the vision for it. I just wish I'd remembered that before I threw it all away." He sat down heavily, his face buried in his hands. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Then Judge Harland spoke. "Mr. McGraw, your apology is noted. However, this court does not base its rulings on expressions of remorse, however genuine they may or may not be. The law is concerned with actions and consequences. Your actions were fraudulent, and your consequences are just." He picked up his gavel. "Now I turn to the final matter, the relationship between Miss Victoria Ashford and the converted assets. Based on the evidence presented, Miss Ashford received gifts totaling approximately $3,000 in value, all purchased with funds that Mr. McGraw had fraudulently diverted from marital property." Clara spoke for the first time in hours. "Your Honor, may I address the court on this matter?" Harland looked surprised but nodded. You may. Clara stood, her voice clear and steady. Your Honor, I do not wish to pursue claims against Miss Ashford. She has left the territory, reportedly returned to Denver. While she was complicit in my husband's affair, I don't believe she knew the money used to court her was stolen. She was foolish and perhaps willfully blind, but not criminal. I ask that the court not pursue recovery of assets from her. Greaves looked at Clara in surprise, but said nothing. Judge Harland studied Clara for a long moment. Mrs. McGraw, you are entitled to recover those assets. Are you certain you want to waive this claim? I am certain, Your Honor. I don't want to spend the next year chasing down necklaces and furniture. I want closure. I want to move forward. Let Miss Ashford keep what she was given. Perhaps she'll learn something from how it was acquired. Harland nodded slowly. Your request demonstrates remarkable grace, Mrs. McGraw. Very well. The court will not pursue recovery from Miss Ashford. He raised his gavel. This court hereby grants the petition for divorce. The marriage of Eli McGraw and Clara McGraw is dissolved. The property shall be divided as I have outlined. Mr. McGraw shall have 30 days to vacate the ranch house and remove his personal property. Mrs. McGraw shall have full ownership and control of the ranch and all associated operations effective immediately. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. In court is adjourned. It was over. Clara stood slowly, feeling as if she had been holding her breath for 3 days and could finally exhale. Sarah was beside her immediately, arms around her mother. James and Thomas approached more slowly, their faces showing a mix of relief, anger at their father, and pride in their mother. Across the courtroom, Eli gathered his few papers and stood to leave. Price was already walking away, his professional obligation ended. Eli walked toward the door alone, no longer the powerful rancher who had entered this courthouse 3 days ago, but a man who had gambled everything and lost. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at Clara one last time. She met his gaze steadily, without anger now, without bitterness, but also without the love that had sustained them for 30 years. That was gone, destroyed by his own choices. Eli nodded once, a gesture that might have been goodbye or acknowledgement or simply surrender. Then he walked out into the afternoon sun, leaving behind everything he had worked for, everything he had built, and the woman who had stood beside him through it all until he chose to stand alone. Clara watched him go. Samuel Greaves touched her arm gently. You won, he said simply. Yes, Clara agreed. I did. But as she walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by her children and well-wishers offering congratulations, she thought about what victory actually meant. She had her land. She had the ranch. She had justice and vindication and the respect of the community. What she didn't have was the life she had built with a partner, the shared history that had defined her adult years. The man she had loved enough to believe forever was possible. Some victories, she understood now, came at costs that could never be fully calculated. But she had stood for herself, spoken her truth, and refused to accept less than she deserved, and that, in the end, was worth more than any property, any amount of money, any courtroom judgment. She had won her dignity, and she had done it without compromising who she was. That was the truest victory of all. Spring came to Montana Territory 3 months after the trial ended, bringing with it the promise of renewal and new beginnings. Clara stood at the entrance to the McGraw Ranch, watching as workers hung a new sign above the gate. The wood was fresh-cut pine, the letters carved deep and painted black. McGraw Ranch, Estner, 1851. Clara McGraw, proprietor. The date marked when her father had first claimed this land, not when Eli had arrived. It was a small detail, but it mattered. History should be accurate, and the history of this ranch began with Samuel Hutchins' vision, passed to his daughter, built through her partnership with a man who eventually walked away. But the land remained. The land always remained. James rode up beside his mother, reining in his horse to look at the new sign. It looks good, Ma. Yes, Clara agreed. It does. In the months since the trial, Clara had transformed from a woman fighting for what was hers to a woman confidently operating what had always been hers. She had promoted James to ranch foreman, brought Thomas in as manager of cattle operations, and hired Robert, Sarah's husband, to oversee the breeding program. The ranch was now truly a family operation, but with Clara's vision directing everything. She had also hired 2 young women from town to help with ranch operations, teaching them the business the way she had learned it, through hands-on work and careful mentorship. If Clara had learned anything from her marriage, it was that women's contributions to building empires should never be invisible or unacknowledged. These young women would know from the start that their work mattered, their judgment was valued, and their futures could include ownership and leadership, not just support roles. The ranch prospered under Clara's management. Without Eli's more impulsive decision-making, Clara implemented careful expansion plans, improved breeding lines, and negotiated contracts that secured better prices for their cattle. Word spread through the territory that Clara McGraw ran one of the best operations in Montana, and other ranchers, many of them initially skeptical about dealing with a woman, learned quickly that she drove a fair but firm bargain. Judge Harland had visited the ranch twice since the trial, ostensibly to check on a legal matter, but really, Clara suspected, to see how she was faring. On his second visit, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the valley. "You've done well, Clara," he said, sipping the coffee she had served him. "I had good bones to build on," she replied. "My father chose this land wisely. I just had to remember that it was always mine to steward. Have you heard anything about Eli?" Clara nodded. "He's working as a ranch hand up near Helena, living in a boarding house. James saw him when he went to negotiate a cattle sale last month. Said Eli looks smaller somehow, older. He asked about me. And what did James tell him?" "That I was doing well." "That the ranch was thriving. That his mother had found her footing again." Clara paused. "James said Eli seemed glad to hear it." "Sad but glad." Harland was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret not pursuing maximum damages? You could have taken more." "No," Clara said firmly. "I took what was fair and what was mine. Taking more would have been vengeance, and vengeance doesn't build anything. It just tears down. I've spent too many years building things to start tearing them down now. You showed remarkable grace in that courtroom." "I showed survival," Clara corrected gently. "Grace implies I did something beyond what was necessary. I simply refused to become bitter. Bitterness would have poisoned me more than Eli's betrayal ever could." As spring turned to summer, Clara received an unexpected letter. It was from Victoria Ashford, postmarked Denver. "Dear Mrs. McGraw," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you, and you have every right to destroy this letter without reading it. But I felt I needed to say something, even if you never respond. I want you to know that I left Millstone Creek with nothing but shame and a hard-learned lesson about the difference between love and convenience, between romance and reality. The gifts Eli gave me, the ones you generously declined to pursue in court, I sold them all. I used the money to enroll in a business college here in Denver. I'm learning bookkeeping and accounts management. I'm learning to support myself rather than looking to be supported. What happened between Eli and me was wrong. I knew he was married, even if I told myself pretty lies about his marriage being over in all but name. It was selfish and foolish, and I helped destroy something that took 30 years to build. I can't undo that, and I will carry the weight of it for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that I learned something from you. When you stood in that courtroom and spoke about partnership and promises and dignity, I heard something I had never heard before. What it means to be truly strong. Not the kind of strength that takes from others or tears down what others have built, but the kind that stands firm on principle, even when it would be easier to crumble. I will never be the woman you are, Mrs. McGraw, but perhaps I can become someone better than the person I was. Thank you for the grace you showed me. I didn't deserve it, but I will try to become someone who might, with sincere regret and newfound respect." Victoria Ashford. Clara read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. She would not respond. There was nothing to say that would change what had happened. But she was glad Victoria was trying to learn from her mistakes. Perhaps some good could come from all the pain after all. One evening in late September, Clara sat on the porch with her 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The youngest ones played in the yard, while the older ones helped prepare dinner. Sarah sat beside her mother, both women watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Are you happy, Mama?" Sarah asked quietly. Clara considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure happiness is what I'm feeling. It's more like peace. I know who I am. I know what I built. I know what I'm capable of. The ranch is mine, not because I fought for it in court, but because I earned it through 30 years of work. No one can take that from me because no one gave it to me. I gave it to myself." "That's better than happiness," Sarah said. "That's contentment." "Maybe," Clara agreed. "Or maybe it's just acceptance. Acceptance that some people will leave, some promises will be broken, some partnerships will end. But the land remains. The work remains. And most importantly, I remain. Not defined by who left me, but by what I chose to keep. My integrity, my dignity, and my voice." As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Clara thought about the courthouse where Judge Harland had delivered his ruling. She thought about Eli, working someone else's ranch up north, learning what it meant to be a hand rather than an owner. She thought about Victoria in Denver, trying to build a life through her own effort rather than through a man's wealth. She thought about her children and grandchildren, learning that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand up for yourself with grace. The frontier had taught her many lessons, but the hardest was this: some people you love will choose wrong. They will betray trust, break promises, walk away from what you built together. And when they do, you have a choice. You can let their choices define you, or you can stand on the foundation you built and prove that you were never dependent on their presence for your worth. Clara McGraw had chosen to stand, and in standing, she had discovered that she was stronger than she ever imagined, not because she had won in court, but because she had refused to lose herself in the process. The ranch sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, her name proudly displayed for all to see, not as someone's wife, not as someone's partner, but simply as herself. Clara McGraw, proprietor, survivor, woman who had built an empire and refused to watch it be stolen from her. She had fought for her dignity, and she had won. Not just in court, but in the deeper battle of remaining true to herself when it would have been easier to become bitter, vengeful, or broken. That was the victory that mattered. That was the legacy she would pass to her children and grandchildren. That was the story that would be told long after the courtroom drama faded from memory. Clara McGraw had stood her ground, and the ground had been hers all along. She just had to remember it.